The Galactic Council chambers had never felt so heavy with dread. Ambassador Zextar of the Valathi Empire shifted nervously in his bioluminescent robes as he watched the holographic display showing the approaching human fleet. Thousands of warships moved through space like a swarm of metallic predators, their engines burning with the fury of dying stars. "They should have responded to our peace offerings by now," whispered Council Prime Yildara, her crystalline voice trembling with uncertainty. The elegant Ashanti leader had ruled the council for 3 centuries, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for this moment. Zextar's tentacles writhed anxiously as he reviewed the data streams flowing across his personal console. "The human fleet will reach our outer defense perimeter in 72 standard hours. Their ships—" He paused, struggling to comprehend the readings. "Their ships are broadcasting something we've never seen before." "What kind of transmission?" demanded General Corthan, the massive Brutari military commander whose scarred exoskeleton bore the marks of countless battles across the galaxy. Even this veteran warrior seemed shaken by the approaching threat. "It's not a communication," Zextar replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a song. A human war song." The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the environmental systems. Every species represented in the council had heard the stories about human music, how these Deathworlders used rhythmic sounds to coordinate their emotions and actions. But a war song broadcast across space itself was something entirely new and terrifying. Council Prime Yildara activated the central holographic projector, displaying the infamous footage that had started this entire crisis. The images showed the human colony world of Kepler 442b, once home to nearly 2 million human settlers. Now it was nothing but a blackened husk, its atmosphere poisoned, its cities reduced to radioactive ash. "The Zorathian hegemony assured us the humans would understand," she said, her voice growing stronger with desperate conviction. "They told us that humans were rational beings who would accept our explanation. The colony was established in violation of the Outer Rim Accords. The humans had no legal claim to that system." But even as she spoke the words, Yildara knew how hollow they sounded. Legal claims meant nothing to a species that had clawed its way up from a death world where survival itself was an act of defiance against the universe. General Corthan's mandibles clicked together in agitation. "The Zorathians said many things. They said humans were weak because they formed emotional attachments. They said humans would negotiate rather than fight because they feared death. They said humans would forgive because forgiveness was a strength in their culture." "And where are the Zorathians now?" asked Ambassador Telvanni of the Merchant Coalition, her multiple eyes scanning the chamber for any sign of their former allies. "Their entire battle fleet disappeared 3 months ago near the human border worlds. No distress signals, no debris fields, nothing." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft chiming of incoming data. Zextar's skin pattern shifted to deep purple as he absorbed the latest intelligence reports. "The human fleet composition is unprecedented," he announced. "We're detecting vessel classes that don't match any known human military designs. They appear to have constructed entirely new ship types, specifically for this campaign." "Show us," ordered the Council Prime. The holographic display shifted to show detailed scans of the approaching human armada. The ships were unlike anything in the galactic databases. Where human vessels had once been functional but unremarkable, these new warships were works of terrible beauty. Their hulls gleamed with some kind of adaptive armor that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Weapon arrays bristled from every surface, and energy signatures indicated power cores far beyond anything humans had previously demonstrated. "How is this possible?" whispered Ambassador Melthari of the Scientific Consortium. "Our last intelligence reports indicated human technology was at least 50 years behind the galactic standard." General Corthan's laugh was bitter and harsh. "You forget where they come from. Humans don't just adapt to their environment. They remake themselves to survive it. We gave them a reason to evolve, and they did it faster than we thought possible." As if summoned by his words, a new transmission began broadcasting across all communication frequencies. The image that appeared was that of a human female, her dark skin marked with the ritual scars that human warriors wore as badges of honor. Her eyes held the cold fire that had made humanity feared across a dozen star systems. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet," the human said, her voice carrying across the void with the weight of absolute authority. 3 months ago, The Galactic Council sanctioned the destruction of our colony at Kepler 442b. 2 million innocent civilians died because you believed we would simply accept your judgment and move on, the Admiral paused. And in that silence, every member of the Council could feel the weight of their collective mistake. You expected us to ask for compensation. You expected us to file formal protests and request arbitration. You expected us to forgive because forgiveness is what civilized species do. Her smile was sharp as a blade. But you forgot something important about humans. We are not civilized. We are domesticated Deathworlders who learned to build ships that could carry us to the stars. And when someone hurts our family, we don't forgive. We adapt. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Outside the massive viewport, the first human scout ships were already visible, as bright points of light moving against the starfield. Council Prime. Ildara realized with growing horror that they had made the greatest mistake in galactic history. They had treated humans like any other species, forgetting that these beings had evolved on a world that tried to kill them every single day. They had expected rational response from a species that had survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, and global extinctions through sheer, stubborn refusal to die. The humans weren't coming to negotiate. They weren't coming to demand justice. They were coming to teach the galaxy a lesson that would be written in fire across the stars. You don't kill human children and expect forgiveness. You prepare for war. The first human probe ship materialized out of faster-than-light travel, with the silence of a predator stalking prey. Unlike the massive warships following behind, this vessel was small and unremarkable, built for stealth and observation rather than destruction. But Admiral Sarah Chen knew that size meant nothing when it came to human engineering ingenuity. Captain Marcus Rivera stood on the bridge of the reconnaissance ship Silent Hunter, watching the Galactic Council's defensive formations through sensors that could detect a mouse breathing on the other side of a planet. The aliens had arranged their fleets in the traditional defensive patterns taught in military academies across the galaxy: overlapping fields of fire, layered shield networks, and strategic fallback positions. It was textbook perfect and utterly useless against an enemy that had rewritten the textbook. Analysis complete, Admiral, Rivera reported through the quantum communication link that connected him directly to the human fleet's command ship. They're using standard Council defensive doctrine. Looks like they haven't learned anything new in the past 2 centuries. Admiral Chen's voice crackled back through the communicator with grim satisfaction. Good. Let them keep thinking we're just another species that plays by their rules. What's the status on their planetary defenses? Rivera's tactical officer, Lieutenant Sarah Kim, looked up from her console with the expression of professional disappointment. Orbital defense platforms are using Mk7 plasma cannons with predictable firing sequences. Planetary shields are running on fusion reactors with thermal exhaust ports every 12 kilometers. It's like they want us to find their weak points. The captain nodded thoughtfully. Humans had spent the last 3 months studying every piece of Galactic Council military technology they could acquire through trade, espionage, and salvage from the disappeared Zarathian fleet. What they had discovered was both encouraging and deeply troubling. The alien races had become comfortable with their technological superiority, building weapons and defenses that prioritized raw power over adaptability. Sir, called out communications specialist Rodriguez, we're picking up increased chatter on Council military frequencies. They're trying to coordinate a first strike option. Rivera almost smiled. The aliens still believed this was going to be a conventional space battle, where superior numbers and firepower would determine the outcome. They had no idea that humanity had spent 3 months doing what humans did best, taking an impossible situation and finding a way to win anyway. Through the bridge's main view screen, the captain could see the first elements of the human fleet beginning to drop out of hyperspace. The sight never failed to fill him with pride. These weren't the same ships that had carried humans to the stars 50 years ago. These were vessels born from humanity's greatest strength, the ability to learn from disaster and come back stronger. The lead ships were the new Vengeance-class battleships, each one named after a human city that had been destroyed throughout history. Warsaw, Hiroshima, Pompeii. Each name a reminder that humans had faced extinction before and survived to tell the tale. Their hulls were crafted from adaptive metamaterials that could reconfigure themselves in real time. turning armor plating into weapon mounts or sensor arrays as the situation demanded. Behind the battleships came the carrier groups, their launch bays filled with fighter craft that barely qualified as ships at all. Human pilots had taken the concept of manned fighters and pushed it to its logical extreme, creating vessels so small and maneuverable that alien targeting systems simply couldn't track them effectively. Each fighter was essentially a life support pod wrapped around the most powerful engine and weapon combination that human engineering could produce. "Captain," Lieutenant Kim announced, "Admiral Chen is requesting targeting data for priority assets." Rivera activated his command console and began highlighting the most critical targets in the alien defensive network. The Council had made their formations beautiful to look at, symmetrical, elegant, and completely predictable. Human military doctrine had abandoned such aesthetics decades ago in favor of pragmatic chaos that made enemy predictions impossible. As he worked, Rivera thought about the message that Admiral Chen had broadcast to the Council. The aliens expected forgiveness because they had always been the dominant power in this region of space. For thousands of years, they had settled disputes through negotiation and compromise because no single species had ever been strong enough to challenge their collective authority. But humans weren't a single species anymore. The destruction of Kepler 442b had done something that no amount of diplomacy or cultural exchange had accomplished. It had united every human colony, every independent ship crew, every corporate security force under a single banner of rage. Earth's government had tried to maintain their policy of peaceful coexistence, but they had been overruled by the colonial representatives who had lost friends and family in the attack. "Incoming transmission from the Council fleet," Rodriguez announced. "They're requesting to speak with our fleet commander." Rivera considered the request for a moment. "Put them through, but visual only from our end. Let's see what they have to say." The main screen shifted to show the bridge of an alien command ship. The being addressing them appeared to be one of the Ashanti, all crystalline beauty and flowing robes that marked their species as natural diplomats. Behind the alien captain, Rivera could see other crew members representing half a dozen different species working together with the efficiency that came from centuries of cooperation. "Human vessel," the alien captain began, her voice carrying the musical tones that made Ashanti such effective negotiators. "I am Fleet Commander Yelsara of the Council Defense Force. We wish to discuss terms for a peaceful resolution to this conflict." Rivera muted his microphone and opened a channel to Admiral Chen. "Admiral, they want to negotiate." "Of course they do," came Chen's reply, sharp with barely controlled anger. "Tell them we'll be happy to discuss terms right after they explain how they plan to bring back 2 million dead colonists." The captain reactivated his communication system. "Fleet Commander Yelsara, we appreciate your desire for dialogue. However, our leadership is currently focused on tactical preparations. Perhaps you could contact us again after we've had a chance to examine your defensive capabilities more closely." The alien's crystalline features shifted in what Rivera recognized as confusion. Clearly, she had expected the humans to eagerly grasp at any chance for peaceful resolution. The idea that they might actually prefer fighting to talking was apparently beyond her comprehension. "Human captain," Yelsara tried again, "surely you understand that further violence will only lead to greater suffering for all involved. The Galactic Council is prepared to offer substantial compensation for the regrettable incident at Kepler 442b. Rivera's jaw tightened. Regrettable incident. That was how they described the cold-blooded murder of an entire world. As if 2 million human lives were just an accounting error to be corrected with the proper paperwork and financial settlement. "Fleet Commander," he replied with deadly calm. "My species has a saying, you can't unbreak an egg. Some things can't be fixed with money or words. Sometimes the only appropriate response is to teach the universe that there are consequences for certain actions." The transmission ended abruptly, as the alien fleet commander apparently realized that humans weren't interested in following the established rules of galactic diplomacy. Through his sensors, Rivera could see the Council ships beginning to shift their formations, moving from defensive positioning to attack readiness. It was exactly what Admiral Chen had been waiting for. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of the TDF Retribution, watching the tactical displays with the cold focus that had earned her the nickname Ice Queen among the younger officers. The massive battleship's bridge was a stark contrast to the elegant designs favored by alien races. Pure function over form, with every surface dedicated to warfare efficiency. Banks of monitors showed real-time data from across the human fleet, while holographic projectors displayed the three-dimensional battlefield in perfect detail. "Admiral," reported Commander Jackson, her tactical officer, "Council forces are moving to attack formation. Estimated time to weapons range, 47 minutes. Chen nodded without taking her eyes off the display. The alien fleet was impressive by any conventional measure. Nearly 3,000 ships representing the combined military might of 15 different species. Their vessels gleamed with polished hulls and energy shields that painted beautiful aurora patterns across space. It was exactly the kind of display that had intimidated countless species into submission over the millennia. "Launch Phase 1, Chen ordered quietly. Across the human fleet, launch bays opened like the mouths of sleeping giants awakening, but instead of the expected fighter squadrons, the first wave consisted of thousands of objects no larger than coffins. To alien sensors, they appeared to be simple reconnaissance drones, hardly worth targeting when massive battleships posed a more obvious threat. The aliens were wrong. Each drone was actually a self-contained weapons platform, operated by human volunteers who had been judged psychologically unsuitable for traditional military service. Criminals, outcasts, and individuals with nothing left to lose. The kind of people that civilized species tried to rehabilitate or hide away. Humanity had given them ships and a chance to die for something meaningful. "Suicide drones deploying," announced Lieutenant Torres from the tactical station. "All volunteer pilots report ready for engagement." Chen felt a familiar tightness in her chest as she thought about the men and women who had climbed into those cramped vessels. Each pilot knew they wouldn't be coming home, but they had volunteered anyway because 2 million dead colonists deserved justice. It was the kind of sacrifice that no alien species truly understood, the willingness to trade individual life for collective purpose. "Phase 2 on my mark," she continued, watching the alien fleet's formation begin to spread out in response to the approaching drone swarm. The council commanders were making exactly the mistake that human strategists had predicted. Faced with thousands of small targets, they were dispersing their fire and weakening their defensive coordination. It was textbook anti-fighter doctrine, perfectly logical and completely wrong for this situation. "Admiral," Commander Jackson said suddenly, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command." Chen's expression darkened. The politicians back home had been trying to interfere with military operations since the moment the fleet had departed Earth's solar system. Apparently, some members of the Terran government still believed this conflict could be resolved through diplomatic channels. "Put it through," she ordered, though her tone made it clear how she felt about the interruption. The holographic display shifted to show the familiar face of Director Harrison, Earth's Secretary of Interstellar Affairs. The man looked exhausted, his usually pristine appearance rumpled from what had probably been days of continuous meetings with alien ambassadors. "Admiral Chen," Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of desperate urgency, "I need you to halt your attack immediately. The Galactic Council has agreed to meet our demands for reparations. They're offering to rebuild Kepler 4482b and provide compensation to the families of every colonist who died." Chen's laugh was bitter and cold. "Director, with all due respect, you can't rebuild the dead. Those weren't just numbers in a computer file, they were people. Children who will never grow up, parents who will never see their kids again, artists and scientists and farmers who had their entire futures stolen from them. Admiral, I understand your anger, but we have to consider the bigger picture. If we destroy the Council fleet, we'll be seen as aggressors by every other species in the galaxy. We'll be isolated, marked as a dangerous threat to galactic peace." "Good," Chen replied without hesitation. "Let them fear us. Let every species in the galaxy understand that humans protect their own, and there are consequences for anyone who forgets that lesson." Harrison's face went pale. "Sarah, you're talking about starting a war that could last for generations. Think about what you're doing." "I am thinking, Director. I'm thinking about 2 million people who trusted the galaxy to treat them fairly and got murdered for their trouble. I'm thinking about the message we send if we accept blood money and pretend this never happened. I'm thinking about the next human colony that some alien government decides to eliminate because it's convenient. The transmission ended as Chen cut the connection. Around the bridge, her officers continued their work with grim efficiency. They understood what their admiral understood. Sometimes peace was worth any price. But sometimes war was the only way to ensure peace had any meaning. Phase 2, execute, Chen ordered. The real surprise wasn't the suicide drones or the massive battleships that dominated the human formation. It was the ships that weren't there, the vessels that existed only as sensor ghosts and quantum shadows. Humanity had spent 3 months developing stealth technology that worked on principles the Galactic Council had never encountered. While alien sensors tracked the obvious threats, they completely missed the cloaked vessels moving through their defensive lines like sharks through a school of fish. Commander, Jackson's voice carried a note of savage satisfaction as he reported. The first phase results. Stealth ships are in position behind enemy lines. Council forces are focusing fire on the drone swarm and haven't detected our infiltration units. Chen watched the tactical display as hundreds of small explosions bloomed across the alien formation. The suicide drones were doing exactly what they were supposed to do, creating chaos and drawing attention away from the real attack. Each explosion represented someone who had chosen to die fighting, rather than live with the knowledge that their species had been marked as acceptable victims. All units, Chen broadcast across the fleet communication network. Remember why we're here. Remember Kepler 442b. Remember that we don't start fights, but we finish them. The response came back from nearly 1 million voices, every human in the fleet speaking in unison. For the dead. For the future. For humanity. It was a war cry that echoed across space itself, carried by radio waves and quantum transmissions to every corner of the battlefield. And for the first time in galactic history, the sound was one that would make alien species wake up screaming for generations to come. The Galactic Council had expected forgiveness, negotiation, and the civilized response that characterized every other species they had encountered. Instead, they got humanity's truest gift to the universe, the knowledge that some things were worth dying for, and some enemies were worth destroying completely. The real battle was about to begin. The first alien ship died without even knowing it was under attack. Commander Valthek of the hegemony destroyer Stellar Pride was monitoring the human drone swarm when his vessel simply ceased to exist. One moment he was calculating firing solutions against the approaching suicide craft. The next moment there was nothing but expanding plasma and debris where his ship had been. The stealth attack sent shockwaves through the Galactic Council fleet that had nothing to do with the explosion itself. For 3,000 years, space combat had followed predictable patterns. Fleets met in open space, exchanged fire at maximum range, and the side with superior technology or numbers eventually prevailed. The idea that an enemy could strike from complete invisibility violated every principle of civilized warfare. Fleet Commander Yelsara watched her tactical displays with growing horror as more ships began disappearing from her formation. The human stealth vessels were moving through her defensive lines like ghosts, striking without warning and vanishing before return fire could be directed at them. Her sensors showed nothing but empty space where logic dictated enemy ships had to be hiding. All units, random evasive maneuvers, she broadcast across the fleet communication network. Activate maximum sensor sweep protocols. The humans have some kind of cloaking technology. But even as she gave the orders, Yelsara knew they wouldn't be enough. The Council races had developed their military doctrine to fight other civilized species who followed established rules of engagement. They had never prepared for an enemy that refused to play by those rules. On the bridge of the TDF Retribution, Admiral Chen watched the opening phase of the battle with grim satisfaction. The stealth ships were performing exactly as designed, using quantum phase generators to bend light and sensor waves around their hulls. It was technology that had been theoretical just 6 months ago, but human desperation had a way of turning theory into reality with impossible speed. Stealth Squadron 7 reports successful strike on alien command vessel, announced Lieutenant Torres. Target destroyed with all hands. Squadron 12 has eliminated 3 Council destroyers in the outer formation, added Commander Jackson. No human casualties reported. Chen nodded but didn't allow herself to feel any satisfaction yet. The opening moves were going according to plan, but she knew the aliens would adapt quickly once they understood what they were facing. The Galactic Council hadn't maintained their dominance for millennia. By being stupid, they were simply unprepared for an enemy that fought with the desperate creativity of a species that had learned warfare on a death world. Begin Phase 3, she ordered. Signal the carrier groups to launch all fighters. Across the human fleet, the massive carrier ships opened their launch bays and began releasing clouds of fighter craft that moved like swarms of mechanical wasps. But these weren't the sleek, elegant interceptors favored by alien militaries. Human fighters were ugly, brutal machines designed around a single principle: getting close enough to the enemy to do maximum damage before being destroyed. Each fighter was essentially a powerful engine wrapped around a pilot and the most destructive weapons that could fit in the remaining space. The life support systems were minimal, the armor was non-existent, and the pilots were volunteers who had accepted that their life expectancy could be measured in minutes once combat began. Captain Lisa Park dove her fighter through a gap in the alien formation, her targeting computer painting enemy ships with the cold precision of death itself. Around her, hundreds of other human pilots were doing the same thing, trading their lives for the chance to strike back at the species that had murdered their families and friends. "This is Wolf Leader," Park announced over the tactical communication network. "Beginning attack run on Council battleship Eternal Harmony. All wings. Follow my lead." Her fighter squadron screamed through space toward the massive alien vessel, their engines burning at maximum output to close the distance before defensive fire could eliminate them. The Council battleship was a beautiful thing, all flowing curves and artistic design elements that marked it as a product of the Ashanti aesthetic philosophy. It was also completely unsuited for the kind of close-quarters combat that humans excelled at. Park's fighter shuddered as alien plasma bolts flashed past her cockpit, close enough that she could feel the heat through her ship's minimal shielding. But she held her course, waiting for the perfect moment to launch her payload. Human fighters didn't carry conventional missiles or energy weapons, they carried something far more devastating. "Payload. Away," she reported as her fighter released its cargo just meters from the alien ship's hull. The device that attached itself to the Council battleship looked like nothing more than a simple magnetic mine. In reality, it was a quantum destabilization warhead that would tear apart the fundamental forces holding the enemy vessel's atoms together. It was a weapon that violated several galactic treaties on humane warfare, but humanity had never signed those treaties. Captain Park's fighter disintegrated under defensive fire 3 seconds after she delivered her payload, but she died knowing that her sacrifice would matter. Across the alien formation, dozens of similar attacks were taking place as human pilots traded their lives for the chance to plant quantum destabilizers on high-value targets. The current Council fleet was beginning to understand that they weren't fighting a conventional enemy. These humans didn't seem to care about their own survival, as long as they could inflict damage on their opponents. It was a form of warfare that no civilized species could comprehend, the willingness to accept certain death in exchange for uncertain victory. Fleet Commander, Yelsara watched her beautiful formation disintegrating under the human assault and felt something she had never experienced before in 3 centuries of military service: genuine fear. Not fear of death, which was an acceptable risk in any military career, but fear of an enemy that seemed to view death as just another tactical option. "All units, fall back to secondary defensive positions," she ordered, though she knew the retreat would only buy them a few minutes. "Request immediate reinforcement from the home fleet." But even as she gave the order, Yelsara suspected that reinforcements would arrive too late to matter. The humans had clearly planned this attack with the precision of a species that understood they would only get one chance to strike back at their oppressors. They weren't fighting to win a battle. They were fighting to send a message that would echo across the galaxy for generations. On the Retribution's bridge, Admiral Chen watched the alien formation beginning to collapse and allowed herself a moment of cold satisfaction. The first phase of the battle was going exactly as planned, but she knew the real test was still to come. The Council forces were retreating toward their planetary defenses, where they could bring orbital weapons platforms and ground-based installations into the fight. "Signal all units," she ordered. "Prepare for planetary assault. The aliens are about to learn what happens when you corner a predator species and give them nothing left to Lose, the human fleet began moving toward the heavily defended world that served as the Galactic Council's regional headquarters. Behind them, the wreckage of the alien fleet drifted through space like a monument to the galaxy's newest nightmare, a species that fought with the desperate fury of beings who had already lost everything that mattered and now had nothing left but revenge. The planet Valathis Prime had never been attacked in its 4,000-year history as the regional capital of the Galactic Council. Its orbital defense platforms were architectural marvels that doubled as symbols of alien prosperity and technological achievement. Each station was home to thousands of civilian workers and their families, making them fortress cities that protected the planet below while serving as monuments to galactic civilization. Admiral Chen studied the defensive network through the Retribution's tactical sensors and felt a familiar coldness settle in her chest. The aliens had built their defenses to intimidate and impress, not to win wars. Every platform was a masterpiece of engineering art, but they were positioned in predictable patterns that prioritized visual impact over tactical effectiveness. "Analysis complete, Admiral," reported Commander Jackson. "Orbital defenses consist of 47 heavy platforms and 16 fortress cities. Each installation is shielded and armed with plasma artillery sufficient to destroy a conventional battle fleet." Chen nodded thoughtfully. "What about civilian populations?" "Conservative estimates indicate approximately 200,000 non-combatants across all orbital installations. The fortress cities appear to be primarily family housing for military personnel and civilian contractors." The Admiral's expression never changed, but every officer on the bridge could feel the weight of the decision hanging in the air. By the laws of civilized warfare, attacking installations with civilian populations was forbidden. But the Galactic Council had forfeited any claim to civilized treatment when they had murdered 2 million innocent humans. "Admiral," Lieutenant Torres said quietly, "we're receiving surrender offers from 6 of the orbital platforms. They're requesting permission to evacuate their civilian populations." "Denied," Chen replied without hesitation. "Signal all platforms that they have 30 minutes to disable their weapons and surrender unconditionally. Any installation that continues to pose a threat after that deadline will be destroyed without further warning." Commander Jackson looked up from his console with an expression of barely concealed concern. "Admiral, the fortress cities are requesting clarification on civilian evacuation procedures. They're asking if we'll accept partial surrender in exchange for allowing non-combatants to evacuate." Chen's laugh was sharp and bitter. "They're asking for mercy after what they did to Kepler 442b. Tell them that civilian evacuation wasn't an option for our colonists. It's not an option for them either." The transmission went out across all frequencies, delivered in the cold, clipped tones that had become Admiral Chen's signature during her rise through the ranks of the Terran Defense Force. Around the planet, alien military commanders received the ultimatum, with the growing realization that they were facing an enemy that played by completely different rules. On Orbital Platform 7, Commander Telvari of the Scientific Consortium watched his tactical displays with the sick certainty of someone who finally understood how completely his species had misjudged humanity. The humans weren't bluffing or engaging in psychological warfare. They genuinely intended to destroy anything that stood in their way, regardless of civilian casualties. "Sir," reported his tactical officer, "the human fleet is moving into attack formation. Their ships are targeting our defensive installations with weapons we've never seen before." Telvari nodded grimly. "All civilian personnel to emergency shelters. Military personnel to battle stations. If we're going to die, we'll die fighting." But even as he gave the orders, the alien commander knew it wouldn't matter. The human ships approaching his platform moved with the coordinated precision of predators that had hunted together for millions of years. Their weapons charged with energies that made his own defensive systems look like children's toys. The first human attack came from the planet's surface. Deep beneath Valathis Prime's capital city, teams of human infiltrators had been waiting for 3 days in tunnels that shouldn't have existed. While the alien fleet had been focused on the approaching space battle, cloaked human transport ships had delivered special forces teams directly to the planet's surface. These soldiers had spent months training for this specific mission. the complete neutralization of the Council's planetary command structure. Sergeant Maria Santos led her team through service tunnels beneath the Galactic Council's primary communication center, moving with the silent efficiency that came from growing up on a world where making noise could attract predators. Her squad carried weapons that fired projectiles rather than energy beams, making them invisible to the alien security systems designed to detect plasma rifles and particle beam weapons. "Target acquired," she whispered into her communication device. "Council High Command is in session in the main conference chamber. Estimated 47 high-value targets." The response came back immediately. "Weapons free. No survivors." Santos's team emerged from the tunnels like ghosts materializing from the planet's underground depths. The alien guards were still trying to understand what they were seeing when human bullets began tearing through their elegant armor with the brutal efficiency of kinetic weapons that alien technology had largely abandoned centuries ago. The Council chamber erupted in chaos as human soldiers stormed through the doors, their weapons cutting down anyone who moved. These weren't the civilized leaders who had expected to negotiate humanity's surrender. They were the architects of genocide, and they would be judged by the same merciless standards they had applied to human colonists. In orbit above the planet, Admiral Chen watched the first orbital platform explode with the cold satisfaction of justice finally being served. The station had continued to power its weapons after the surrender deadline, and her fleet had responded with overwhelming force. The beautiful architectural marvel became an expanding cloud of debris and superheated plasma in less than 3 seconds. "Fortress City Prime is requesting immediate ceasefire," reported Lieutenant Torres. "They're offering to surrender all weapons and submit to human occupation." "Too late," Chen replied. "They had their chance. Destroy it." The human fleet's new weapons were unlike anything in the galactic databases. Instead of conventional energy beams or projectile weapons, they fired concentrated bursts of exotic matter that simply unmade whatever they touched. The fortress city's shields flared brilliantly for a moment before collapsing, and then the installation itself began dissolving at the molecular level. Across the orbital defense network, alien commanders watched their colleagues die and realized that surrender was no longer an option. The humans had moved beyond the possibility of negotiation into pure, methodical revenge. They weren't trying to win a war. They were conducting an extermination. "Admiral," Commander Jackson announced, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the planet's surface. Sergeant Santos reports mission complete. Galactic Council High Command has been eliminated." Chen nodded once, sharp and final. "Signal the fleet. Begin planetary bombardment. I want every military installation, every government building, and every communication center reduced to ash. Leave the civilian populations alive. They'll need to carry the message to the rest of the galaxy." The human ships took position in high orbit and began raining destruction down on the planet below. But this wasn't random devastation. It was surgical precision applied with ruthless efficiency. Every target was chosen for maximum psychological impact while carefully avoiding civilian neighborhoods and refugee centers. The message was clear. Humanity could reach anywhere in the galaxy, strike any target, and eliminate any threat. The only reason the civilian population survived was because humans chose to let them live. It was a lesson in mercy that came wrapped in absolute terror, and it would be remembered for as long as galactic civilization existed. As the bombardment continued, Admiral Chen stood on her bridge and thought about the 2 million colonists who would never see this moment of justice. They hadn't died for nothing. Their deaths had taught the galaxy that humans were not a species to be dismissed or eliminated casually. The price of that lesson had been paid in blood and fire, but it was a lesson that would never need to be taught again. The aliens had expected forgiveness. Instead, they got education. 3 months after the Battle of Valathis Prime, the galaxy had become a very different place. Ambassador Zextar of the former Valathi Empire stood in what had once been the magnificent Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council. Now it was a makeshift refugee center, its crystalline walls scorched black and its elegant architecture reduced to functional emergency shelters. Around him, representatives from dozens of species huddled together in the desperate camaraderie of survivors. The human fleet had departed as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving behind a message that echoed across every communication frequency in known space. Admiral Chen's final transmission had been broadcast to every inhabited world within 1,000 light-years, and its words had been translated into every known language. The Galactic Council sanctioned the murder of 2 million human civilians. In response, we have eliminated the leadership responsible for that decision and destroyed the military forces that carried it out. This is not conquest, this is justice. We are returning to human space now, but we will be watching. Any species that threatens human colonies in the future will receive the same treatment. Humanity does not forgive. Humanity does not forget. Humanity protects its own. The transmission had ended with something that still gave Zextar nightmares. The sound of 2 million human voices singing a song of mourning that somehow managed to sound like a promise of vengeance. It was a sound that would haunt the dreams of alien leaders for generations to come. "The Terran ambassador is here," announced one of Zextar's aides, a young Ashanti whose crystalline features had been dulled by malnutrition and stress. Zextar looked up to see a human woman entering the refugee center with the confident stride of someone who represented the galaxy's newest superpower. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes was Earth's new special envoy for galactic affairs, and her presence marked the first official diplomatic contact between humanity and the surviving council races since the devastating human victory. "Ambassador Zextar," Dr. Hayes said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "I'm here to discuss terms for the reconstruction of galactic civilization." The alien diplomat stared at the offered hand for a long moment before hesitantly reaching out to clasp it. Human touch was warm, he discovered. Warmer than the cold efficiency of their military technology might suggest. It was a reminder that these beings were still organic creatures despite their mechanical precision in warfare. "Dr. Hayes," Zextar replied, his translator converting his words into the crisp syllables of human English. We are honored by your presence, though I confess we are uncertain what terms you might offer." The human ambassador smiled, and there was genuine warmth in the expression despite everything that had happened. "We're not here to rule you, Ambassador. Humanity has no interest in governing alien species or imposing our culture on other worlds. We simply want to establish new rules that ensure this kind of tragedy never happens again." She activated a portable holographic projector that displayed a document written in dozens of different languages and symbol systems. The text was comprehensive but surprisingly straightforward, a new set of galactic accords that prioritized individual species sovereignty while establishing clear consequences for aggressive actions against civilian populations. "The Terran Accords," Dr. Hayes explained, "are based on a simple principle that humans learned during our own history of warfare: mutually assured destruction. Any species that attacks civilian populations will face immediate and overwhelming retaliation from the combined military forces of all signatory species." Zextar studied the document with growing amazement. The humans weren't demanding tribute or territorial concessions. They weren't establishing themselves as the new galactic government or imposing their political system on conquered species. Instead, they were proposing a defensive alliance based on the threat of collective retaliation against aggressors. The enforcement mechanism, he noted, reading through the military clauses, relies heavily on human naval forces. "For now," Dr. Hayes agreed, "but we're prepared to share our military technology with any species that commits to the defense of civilian populations. Within a generation, every member of the alliance will have access to the same weapons that defeated the Council fleet." The implications of that statement sent shockwaves through the assembled alien representatives. Humanity was offering to arm other species with the technology that had made them the galaxy's dominant military power. It was either the most generous gesture in galactic history or the most terrifying demonstration of confidence. "Why?" asked Ambassador Telvanni of the Merchant Coalition, speaking for the first time since the negotiations had begun. "Why would you give us the means to potentially challenge your supremacy?" Dr. Hayes's expression became serious, and for a moment the assembled aliens could see the steel beneath her diplomatic manner. "Because supremacy isn't what we want. We want security. We want to know that no human colony will ever again face destruction, simply because some alien government finds our presence inconvenient." She paused, looking around the room at the representatives of species that had once commanded vast stellar empires and now existed as refugees in their own territories. The galaxy made a mistake when it decided that humans were acceptable victims. We've corrected that mistake, but we have no desire to become the kind of imperial power that the old council represented. We want partners, not subjects. We want allies who understand that civilian populations are off limits in any conflict. The negotiations continued for 3 days, with human patience and alien desperation, eventually producing a document that would reshape galactic civilization. The Terran Accords established humanity as the guarantor of galactic peace while allowing other species to maintain their independence and cultural autonomy. But the real victory wasn't in the legal documents or territorial agreements. It was in the fundamental shift in how the galaxy viewed humanity. No longer were humans seen as primitive Deathworlders who could be safely ignored or eliminated. They were now recognized as a species that possessed both the capability and willingness to defend their own interests with overwhelming force. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Retribution as the ship entered Earth's solar system for the first time in 6 months. Behind her, the veterans of the Velathes campaign were finally coming home to a world that understood what they had accomplished. The message boards and communication networks were full of debates about the ethics of their victory, but Chen didn't care about the philosophical discussions. She cared about the intelligence. Reports that showed human colonies throughout the galaxy were now being treated with respect and caution by their alien neighbors. She cared about the diplomatic missions that were arriving at Earth to request alliance with humanity. She cared about the fact that no human child would ever again die simply because some alien government found their existence inconvenient. The aliens had expected forgiveness, but humanity had given them something far more valuable: education about the consequences of targeting civilians in warfare. It was a lesson written in fire across the stars, and it would be remembered for as long as intelligent life existed in the galaxy. As Earth grew larger in the view screen, Admiral Chen allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The dead of Kepler 442b had been avenged, and their deaths had purchased security for every human who would ever venture into the vast darkness between the stars. It was a victory that would echo through the generations, ensuring that humanity's voice would be heard and respected in the councils of galactic civilization. The Deathworlders had taught the galaxy a lesson about the price of peace, and that lesson would never be forgotten.